Bad Science, by Ben Goldacre. Introduction. Imagine this for a moment. You're watching daytime television, and a woman is on screen, talking about a new health craze called the Aqua Detox foot bath. She dips her feet into a bowl of clear water, flips a switch, and you watch, mesmerized, as the water slowly turns a murky, disgusting brown. She smiles. "Those are the toxins," she says, "being pulled right out of my body." It looks convincing. It feels real. All that stress from modern life, all the junk food, all the pollution, gone. Purged into a bowl of brown sludge. Who wouldn't want that? Well, there was a young doctor in Britain watching that same show. His name is Ben Goldacre. And he didn't feel relief. He felt a different feeling altogether. A kind of curious suspicion. He thought to himself, is that really what's happening here, or is this just theater? So, he decided to run an experiment. Not in a fancy lab, but right in his own home. He took a bowl of warm salt water, just like the one on TV. He passed a small electrical current through it, just like the machine did. But he made one crucial change. Instead of putting his own feet in, he used his girlfriend's Barbie doll. And he watched. And before his very eyes, the water turned brown. There sat the world's first detox Barbie, her tiny plastic feet in a pool of brown goo, purged of a weekend's worth of plastic immorality. That one simple, slightly ridiculous experiment holds the key to everything we're going to talk about today. It's the heart of a brilliant, funny, and incredibly important book called Bad Science, written by that same doctor, Ben Goldacre. This book became a phenomenon, a top 10 bestseller that armed hundreds of thousands of people with a new way of seeing the world. Ben Goldacre is a doctor, an epidemiologist, and for years he wrote a column in the Guardian newspaper taking apart the nonsense that we're fed every single day. Not just by the obvious quacks and miracle cure artists, but by journalists, by governments, by big corporations, and sometimes, even by well-meaning but misguided teachers. What he discovered, and what he lays out so beautifully in this book, is that the world is full of people who want to sell you things, pills, diets, creams, ideas, by dressing them up in the language of science. But once you learn a few simple tricks, once you learn how to ask the right questions, you can start to see through it all. It's like getting a new superpower. A kind of X-ray vision for the truth. And that's my promise to you today. By the end of our time together, you will have that superpower. You will learn the tools to spot bad science from a mile away. You'll understand why we fall for it, how it's used to manipulate us, and most importantly, how to think more clearly not just about health, but about everything. This isn't just about debunking nonsense, it's about learning a better way to think. So, let's begin our journey. Let's pull back the curtain on the theater of bad science. Book summary. Our story begins with the simplest, most alluring promise of all. The promise of a quick fix. The idea that you can wash away your bad habits, your indulgences, your toxins. The detox industry is a multi-billion-dollar empire built on this single, powerful idea. But as we saw with Detox Barbie, it often rests on a foundation of pure theater. Goldacre calls it the theater of goo. It's the satisfying visual trick that makes you believe something profound is happening. Take those detox foot patches. You stick what looks like a tea bag to the bottom of your foot before bed. When you wake up, it's full of a sticky, smelly, brown sludge. The packaging tells you this sludge is the toxins that have been pulled from your body while you slept. A miracle, right? But you don't need a lab to test this. You just need a cup of tea. If you take one of those patches and just drip a little hot water onto it, you'll see the same brown sludge form right before your eyes. It's a simple chemical reaction. The main ingredient is a powder called wood vinegar, which is highly hygroscopic, a fancy word that just means it loves to absorb water. When it gets wet from your sweat, it turns into a warm, brown mush. The other ingredient is basically just starch, which gets sticky. No toxins, just sweat and a clever chemical trick. It's the same story with ear candles. These are hollow wax tubes that you're told will create a gentle suction, drawing out impurities and earwax from deep within your ear canal. And the proof? When you're done, you can unroll the candle and find a waxy, orange substance inside. It must be earwax. But again, a simple experiment reveals the truth. Goldacre suggests you get 2 ear candles. Put one in someone's ear, as instructed. Take the other one and just stand it up by itself, away from any ear at all. Light them both and let them burn down. When you cut them open, you'll find the same waxy orange substance in both. It isn't earwax from your soul, it's just melted candle wax. It's more theater. Now, it's easy to laugh at this. Foot patches and ear candles seem a bit silly. But this is just the first step on a long ladder. The same principles of misdirection, of creating the appearance of science, are used in much more sophisticated ways. Let's move from the health food store to the cosmetics counter. The creams there are filled with magical-sounding ingredients: progenium xi complex, vita niacin, tensor peptidic vegetal. Surely this is high-tech stuff, right? Well, yes and no. Most moisturizers work in a very simple way. Your skin feels dry because it's losing water. A moisturizer's job is to stop that from happening. It's basically just a mix of oil and water, held together by something called an emulsifier. You can make it in your kitchen. Vaseline does the job brilliantly. So what about all those fancy ingredients? Goldacre explains they generally fall into 3 categories. First, there are a few powerful chemicals, like vitamin A derivatives, that genuinely can have an effect on your skin's appearance. But they only work at such high concentrations that they cause irritation and redness, so unless you're getting it on prescription, the amount in your cream is usually just a tiny talismanic dose, too small to do anything, but just enough to be listed on the label. The second ingredient is the one that gives you that immediate feeling of tightness. It's usually some form of mashed-up vegetable protein. When the cream dries on your skin, these long, soggy protein chains contract and tighten, temporarily shrinking your fine wrinkles. It's a fleeting effect, but it feels like it's working. Almost all expensive creams have this. And the third category? A huge list of esoteric ingredients thrown in with suggestive language elegantly woven around them. A company will say, this molecular component is crucial for collagen formation, and that might be true in a textbook. But it doesn't mean you're deficient in it, or that smearing it on your face will make any difference at all. Your skin's main job, after all, is to be a barrier. It's designed to keep things out. When you sit in a bathtub full of baked beans for charity, you don't get fat. Your body is a finely tuned system, and you can't just hoodwink it by rubbing salmon egg DNA on your forehead. The link between the magic ingredient and the effect is made only in your mind, helped along by an army of marketing consultants who make sure the label is highly suggestive, but legally watertight. This isn't just about wasting money. These adverts sell a broken idea of what science is. They sell the idea that science is about impenetrable, sciencey sounding nonsense, made up in a lab to sell you something. They teach you that science is something you can't possibly understand, so you just have to trust the authority figure in the white coat. But science isn't an authority. It's a method. It's a way of asking questions and testing ideas to make sure you aren't fooling yourself. And that brings us to one of the biggest and most misunderstood areas of all: homeopathy. Now, homeopathy is the perfect tool for learning about how to test if a treatment really works. Not because it's dangerous, it isn't, but because it's the perfect model for a fair test. Homeopathy pills are, at their core, empty little sugar pills. And yet, many people feel they work. So they force us to ask a really important question: how can we be misled into thinking a treatment is effective when it really isn't? Homeopathy was invented in the late 1700s by a German doctor named Samuel Hahnemann. His idea was based on a principle he called like cures like. If a substance causes certain symptoms in a healthy person, he reasoned, then a tiny amount of that same substance could be used to treat those symptoms in a sick person. But the key feature of homeopathy is the dilution. Hahnemann believed that the more you dilute a substance, the more potentized it becomes. A typical homeopathic dilution is called 30C. This means the original substance has been diluted by a factor of 1 in 130 times over. It's hard to get your head around how big that number is. A 30C dilution is 1 part in 10 to the power of 60. That's a 1 followed by 60 zeros. Goldacre puts it beautifully. Imagine a sphere of water with a diameter stretching from the Earth to the Sun. Now imagine putting one single molecule of your active ingredient into that entire sphere of water. That's a 30C dilution. At these levels, there is statistically zero chance that a single molecule of the original substance remains in the pill you take. When modern science pointed this out, homeopaths came up with a new idea: the memory of water. The water, they claim, remembers the substance that was once in it. But this creates its own problems. If water has a memory, then why doesn't it remember all the other things it's been in contact with throughout history, from dinosaur urine to industrial waste? And how does it know to transfer that memory to the sugar pill it's dripped onto before it evaporates? It's a universe of foolishness. But here's the most important point Goldacre makes: we shouldn't get bogged down arguing about the theory. The real question is much simpler. Does it work? How do we know if any treatment works? This is where things get really interesting. Someone who believes in homeopathy might say, "All I know is, I feel better when I take it," and they're not lying. They do feel better. But why do they feel better? There are two powerful illusions at play here, and they affect all of us, every single day. The first is the famous placebo effect. But the placebo effect is so much more than just a sugar pill. It's the entire ritual and meaning surrounding a treatment. We know from experiments that 2 sugar pills are a more effective painkiller than 1 sugar pill. We know that a saltwater injection is a more effective painkiller than a sugar pill, not because of the salt, but because an injection feels like a more dramatic intervention. The color of a pill, the fancy packaging, how much you pay for it, and even the doctor's belief in the treatment, all of these things have a measurable effect on how well a patient responds. It's the story we tell ourselves about the treatment that does the healing. Homeopathy, with its long consultations and mystical explanations, is a masterclass in generating a powerful placebo response. The second illusion is something called regression to the mean. This is just a fancy way of saying that things tend to return to normal on their own. If you have back pain, you have good days and bad days. When is the most likely time for you to seek out a new treatment? Probably when your pain is at its absolute worst. But when things are at their worst, they have nowhere to go but up. Your pain was likely to get better anyway, just as part of its natural cycle. But because you took the homeopathic remedy at the peak of your pain, your brain naturally concludes that the remedy must have been the cause of your recovery. As Voltaire said, the art of medicine consists in amusing the patient while nature cures the disease. So, with the placebo effect and regression to the mean both fooling us, how can we ever know if a pill itself is actually doing anything? The answer is the most powerful idea in all of modern medicine: the randomized controlled trial. It's a beautifully simple concept. You take a large group of people with the same condition. You randomly split them in half. One half gets the real pill. The other half gets an identical-looking fake pill, a placebo. And here's the crucial part: nobody knows who got what. not the patients, and not even the doctors. This is called blinding. Why is it so important? Because if the doctors knew who was getting the real drug, they might unconsciously treat them differently, or interpret their symptoms more optimistically, tainting the results. At the end of the trial, you unblind the data, and you simply count. How many people got better in the real pill group versus the placebo group? If the real pill has any effect beyond the placebo, it will show up here, clear as day. This is the FAIR test. It's the tool we use to protect ourselves from being misled by our own flawed intuitions. So, what happens when you apply this FAIR test to homeopathy? Hundreds of high-quality trials have been done. And when you gather them all together in what's called a meta-analysis, the result is overwhelming. Homeopathy pills work no better than placebo pills. The power isn't in the pill, it's in the ritual. Understanding this allows us to see one of the biggest deceptions in the world of alternative health. Practitioners of nutritionism, for example. Unlike homeopaths, they've managed to brand themselves as scientific. Their claims have a grain of real science to them, which makes them not only more interesting, but also more dangerous. They prey on our desire for simple answers to complex problems, and they do it by making a few key mistakes in how they interpret evidence, mistakes they repeat over and over again. The first mistake is cherry-picking. With millions of scientific papers published, you can find a study to support almost any opinion you want, especially if you ignore all the studies that contradict it. A nutritionist might wave around one small, obscure trial suggesting vitamin C prevents colds, while ignoring the massive, definitive Cochrane review, which pools together 29 different trials and over 11,000 people, that concludes it does not. The second mistake is taking lab bench science and applying it directly to real people. A nutritionist might tell you that a chemical in turmeric is highly protective against cancer because it killed some cancer cells in a glass dish. But anything can kill cells in a dish. Dish soap will kill cells in a dish, but you don't drink it to cure cancer. The human body is infinitely more complex. In the case of turmeric, it turns out that very little of the active chemical is even absorbed by your body. You'd have to eat a cup of the spice to get a meaningful dose. The third mistake is confusing correlation with causation. This is a big one. You might read in the paper that an Australian study found that olive oil offered measurable protection against skin wrinkling. That sounds great. But when you look at the actual study, you find it was an observational study. It didn't give people olive oil and watch their wrinkles disappear. It just observed that people in Greece, who happen to eat a lot of olive oil, also happen to have fewer wrinkles than people in Sweden. But they also have different genes, different levels of sun exposure, different jobs, different lives. There are a million other things. What scientists call confounding variables? That could explain the difference. To claim with certainty that the olive oil is the cause is a huge leap of faith. And this brings us to one of the biggest nutritional fairy tales of the past 20 years, the myth of antioxidants. The theory was beautiful. Our bodies produce nasty, reactive molecules called free radicals that can damage our cells, leading to aging and disease. Antioxidants, found in fruits and vegetables, are molecules that can mop up these free radicals. So, the logic went, if we take lots of extra antioxidants in pill form, we should be able to slow aging and prevent diseases like cancer and heart disease. It made perfect sense. Observational studies even seem to support it. People who ate more vegetables, or had higher blood levels of antioxidants, were healthier. So, scientists did what scientists do. They put it to the test with massive, rigorous, randomized controlled trials. These weren't small, shabby studies. We're talking about huge, publicly funded trials with tens of thousands of people, running for years. One was called the CARROT trial. It took two groups of people at high risk of lung cancer, smokers and asbestos workers. Half were given high-dose antioxidant pills, beta-carotene and vitamin A, and the other half got a placebo. The trial was supposed to run for 6 years. But they had to stop it early. It was considered unethical to continue. Why? Because the people taking the antioxidant pills were dying faster. They were 46% more likely to die from lung cancer, and 17% more likely to die of any cause, than the people taking the placebo pills. It was a shocking result. And it wasn't a one-off. Trial after trial, meta-analysis after meta-analysis, all came to the same conclusion. High-dose antioxidant supplements were at best useless, and at worst, actively harmful. The beautiful, simple theory was wrong. The body, it turns out, is a bit more complicated than that. Free radicals, for example, aren't just bad guys. Your immune system uses them as weapons to kill bacteria. Flooding your system with antioxidants might be like disarming your own soldiers. The antioxidant story is a perfect object lesson in the dangers of nutritionism. It shows how a plausible theory, backed by weak observational data, can lead us down a dangerous path. It shows how the simple, common-sense advice, eat lots of fruit and vegetables, gets twisted and overcomplicated by an industry that needs to sell you something: a pill, a powder, a special berry from a distant mountain. But nutritionists aren't the only ones who get it wrong. In fact, they're just a small part of a much bigger problem. The biggest engine for the public misunderstanding of science is the media. Science stories in the media, Goldacre argues, generally fall into one of 3 categories: wacky stories, breakthrough stories, and scare stories. Wacky stories are the scientists find the formula for the perfect cheese sandwich type of filler. They're almost always just PR stunts, paid for by a company to get their name in the paper. The perfect cheese sandwich formula was sponsored by a cheese company. The happiest day of the year formula was sponsored by an ice cream company. These stories create a parody of science, portraying it as pointless, irrelevant boffonry. Breakthrough stories are the miracle cure for cancer found headlines. The problem is, science rarely works in giant leaps. It moves forward in small, incremental steps. A single study, especially one with a new and surprising result, is often just a blip. It needs to be replicated and confirmed by other studies. But the media's obsession with newness means they jump on the most dramatic, outlying results, creating a false impression that science is flimsy and constantly changing. And then there are the scare stories. And there is no greater example of a media-driven health scare than the tragic, damaging, and entirely manufactured hoax of the MMR vaccine. The story, as it appeared in the British media for nearly a decade, went something like this. A brave maverick doctor named Andrew Wakefield discovered a link between the MMR triple vaccine and a new, terrifying form of autism. More research confirmed this link, but the government and the evil pharmaceutical industry conspired to cover it up, rubbishing his claims and persecuting him, all while refusing to offer parents the safer option of single jabs. Every single part of that story was wrong. Let's go back to the beginning. The infamous 1998 Wakefield paper in The Lancet was not a huge, definitive study. It was what's called a case series. It was just a description of 12 children. 12. These children had been referred to a specialist clinic because they had both bowel problems and developmental disorders, like autism. The paper noted that in 8 of these 12 cases, the parents believed their child's problems started soon after they received the MMR jab. That's it. That was the paper. It was a collection of anecdotes. It didn't compare a group of vaccinated children with a group of unvaccinated children. By its very design, it could not possibly prove a causal link. It was, at best, a clinical hunch, a suggestion that more research might be interesting. But at the press conference for the paper, Wakefield went much further. He announced that he believed it would be prudent for parents to stop using the triple MMR jab and demand single vaccines instead. There was no evidence in his paper, or anywhere else, to support this. In fact, there are good reasons to believe single jabs are more dangerous. They require more visits, more jabs, and leave children unprotected for longer. That was the spark. But the media poured gasoline on it for years. While they lionized Wakefield as a persecuted hero, a Galileo figure fighting the establishment, they systematically ignored the mountain of high-quality evidence that was emerging from all over the world. There was the massive study in Denmark, which looked at every single child born in the country over 8 years, more than 500,000 children in total. It compared the rates of autism in the 440,000 children who got the MMR vaccine with the 96,000 who didn't. The result? No difference whatsoever. There was the case control study in the UK, which took 1,300 children with autism and compared them to 4,500 children without autism. It looked back to see if the autistic children were any more likely to have had the MMR jab. The result? No difference whatsoever. Dozens of studies, involving millions of children, all came to the same conclusion. There is no link between MMR and autism. The media barely reported any of them. Instead, they filled their pages with emotive, heart-wrenching stories from parents who were convinced the vaccine had damaged their child. They pitted these distraught families against bland, boring scientists talking about statistics. In a battle between emotion and data, emotion always wins in the press. The consequences were devastating. Vaccination rates plummeted. In 1996, 92% of children in the UK got their MMR jab. By 2004, it had fallen to 80%, and in some parts of London, it was below 60%. And so, the old diseases came back. Diseases that a generation of doctors had barely ever seen. Measles, a disease that was on the verge of being eliminated, saw its highest number of cases in a decade. Children died. In 2005, the UK had a massive mumps epidemic, with almost 50,000 cases. Mumps can cause viral meningitis, deafness, and in adult men, sterility. The MMR scare was not Andrew Wakefield's fault alone. He may have lit the match, but the media fanned the flames into a devastating inferno. They did it because it was a great story. It had heroes and villains, conflict and tragedy. And in their cynical pursuit of that story, they abandoned their responsibility and caused untold harm. It's tempting, after all this, to think that the problem is just with alternative medicine and bad journalism. But Goldacre saves his most powerful critique for last. The same tricks, the same distortions of evidence, the same sleights of hand are used every single day by the mainstream pharmaceutical industry. Big Pharma. We all have a vague feeling that these companies are a bit evil. But because we don't know exactly how they're evil, our anger gets misdirected into silly fantasies about homeopathy being the answer. The truth is much more subtle, and much more important. Drug companies have a legal duty to maximize profit for their shareholders. This often sits uncomfortably with the goal of caring for people. And since almost all clinical trials of new drugs are funded by the companies that make them, they have enormous power to distort the evidence that doctors rely on to make decisions. How do they do it? They use all the tricks we've now learned about, but in a much more sophisticated way. They might design a trial to flatter their new drug. For example, when comparing their new drug to an older one, they might use a deliberately low dose of the competitor's drug to make it look less effective. Or a very high dose, to make it look like it has more side effects. They might choose to measure a surrogate outcome instead of a real-world one. Instead of measuring whether their cholesterol drug actually reduces heart attacks and deaths, which is hard and takes a long time, they'll just measure whether it lowers cholesterol. It's an easier win, but it doesn't prove the drug is saving lives. They can torture the data. If their overall results are disappointing, they can slice and dice the data into smaller subgroups until they find one that looks positive. Maybe the drug didn't work for everyone, but it worked for Chinese women aged 52 to 61. If you torture the data long enough, as the saying goes, it will confess to anything. But the biggest crime of all is publication bias. It's very simple. Positive trials, the ones that show a drug works, are exciting. They get published in big journals. Negative trials, the ones that show a drug is useless, or even harmful, are boring. They are often never published at all. They get buried in a filing cabinet, becoming data on file, hidden from the view of doctors and patients. This isn't a small problem. It's a systemic, evidence-distorting disaster. The most famous recent example is with a class of antidepressant drugs. A group of academics used the Freedom of Information Act to get hold of all the trials submitted to the regulators, both published and unpublished. What they found was staggering. 37 studies that the regulators saw as positive were all published. But of the 36 studies that the regulators saw as negative or questionable, 22 were never published at all, and 11 were written up in a way that spun them to look positive. Doctors were being systematically misled. They thought these drugs were far more effective than they really were, because they were only seeing a biased selection of the evidence. And here is the most infuriating part. Almost all of these problems, the cherry-picking, the data dredging, the hiding of negative results, could be solved overnight with one very simple, almost cost-free intervention: a mandatory, public clinical trials register. Before any company starts a trial, they would have to publish the protocol online, stating what they're going to do, and what they're going to measure. Then, if the trial results never appear, it would stick out like a sore thumb. Everyone would know they had something to hide. It's such a simple, powerful idea. And yet, it still hasn't happened. Commentary. So where does all of this leave us? After journeying through the world of detox footbaths, homeopathy, antioxidant myths, media scares, and corporate cover-ups, it's easy to feel a bit cynical, a bit overwhelmed. But that's not the point of bad science. The point isn't to make you feel powerless, it's to make you feel powerful. The most important lesson in this book, the golden thread that runs through every page, is this: science is not a collection of facts. It's not a list of things you have to memorize. It is, at its heart, a method. A toolkit. A way of thinking. It's a process for asking questions, for testing ideas, and most importantly, for protecting ourselves from our own beautiful, brilliant, but deeply flawed minds. As human beings, we are pattern-seeking animals. We see faces in the clouds. We believe in winning streaks. We are hardwired to find meaning and causality, even in random noise. We are biased. We seek out evidence that confirms what we already believe, and we find it easy to ignore evidence that challenges us. We are drawn to dramatic, emotional stories far more than we are to cold, abstract statistics. These are not personal failings. They are the features of being human. And this is why we invented the scientific method. We invented it as a systematic way to overcome our own biases, to make sure we haven't been fooled by randomness, or by our own desire for a simple, comforting story. And this way of thinking isn't just for scientists in labs. It's for all of us, every single day. The world we live in is not going to get any simpler. We're going to be constantly bombarded with claims about our health, our finances, our politics, our world. And if we don't have the tools to sort the good ideas from the bad, we're at the mercy of those who would mislead us, whether for profit or for power. So, what can you do, starting today? Ben Goldacre gives us a few simple things to keep in mind. First, whenever you hear a claim, especially one that sounds a bit too good or a bit too scary, just ask one simple question: how do you know? What's the evidence? Is it just an anecdote, a single story, or is it a proper, fair test? Second, be wary of authority. The fact that someone has doctor before their name, or wears a white coat on television, means nothing. The strength of their claim doesn't come from who they are, it comes from the quality of the evidence they can present. Science is built on the idea of nullius in verba, on the word of no one. You don't have to trust anyone. You just have to look at their working. And third, don't be afraid of the details. The media and the marketing men want you to believe that the science is too complicated for you to understand. It isn't. As we've seen, the core ideas, a fair test, the placebo effect, regression to the mean, are beautifully simple. Anyone can understand them. And once you do, you start to see them everywhere. You realize that most of the bad science out there isn't based on complicated trickery, it's based on very simple, repeated mistakes. This book, Bad Science, is more than just a collection of funny stories about quacks. It's a call to arms. It's an invitation to think a little more critically, to question a little more deeply, and to demand a little bit more from those who claim to have the answers. It's a reminder that the most powerful tool we have for navigating the complexities of the modern world is not certainty, but a healthy, curious, and well-informed skepticism. That was the summary of Bad Science by Ben Goldacre. We've touched on the main ideas today, but I have to be honest with you, a summary is just a map, not the journey itself. The real magic of this book is in Goldacre's sharp wit, his clear explanations, and the sheer joy he takes in unraveling nonsense. This summary is here to help you decide if this book deserves your time. If anything we've talked about has sparked your curiosity or made you see things in a new light, then I wholeheartedly encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts, it's about upgrading your own thinking, and that's an experience that can genuinely change your life. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to like this summary and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that we're on the right track, and it ensures you won't miss our next dive into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning, and let's keep growing, together.